This week, we're talking to Michael Haddad, who had 32 years of flight and ground systems engineering and operational experience at Kennedy Space Center, working hard behind the scenes on the Space Shuttle.
Yeah, this is one of those great untold story interviews, and we've already decided we need to get him back, so I assure you it's a good one.
Please let us know your thoughts. Let us know via the social media pages at Space and Things Podcast on Threads, Instagram, and Facebook, or via the contact form on our website, or by leaving a review on your podcast platform.
And please consider joining us on patreon.com/Space and Things. But right now, it's time for episode 205 of the Space and Things podcast.
Oh my God! Unbelievable! Unbelievable, but it is right this time.
You're listening to the Space and Things podcast with Emily Carney and Dave Giles.
I'm Emily Carney.
And I'm Dave. Did you have to think about that?
No. No, I didn't have to think about that. No,
Your face did something very funny there.
No.
Has it got that bad? Have I written the wrong name?
No. I heard myself swallow and I momentarily had oh God. No, that's going to sound bad on the playback. Oh my God. That's going to sound bad.
Anyway.
All right. Sorry, Dave.
And I'm Dave Giles, and welcome to episode 205 of our podcast. I'm in Munich this week, so this was recorded last week. So we have no What Caught Our Eye in Spaceflight section this week, but we've got a great interview lined up for you.
Yes, we do. Today we talked to Michael Haddad, who retired in 2011 from NASA at Kennedy Space Center with 32 years of flight and ground systems engineering and operational experience. His responsibilities included hands-on processing for different classifications of flight hardware for domestic and international payloads, Spacelab payloads, Shuttle Planetary Observatory, and satellite-class payloads such as Galileo, Ulysses, and Gamma Ray Observatory, TDRS communication satellites, and Hubble Space Telescope. He was the KSC point of contact for extravehicular activities, EVA, and crew systems for the International Space Station, ISS, and Constellation program, as well as the integration engineer for the ISS Multi-Element Integrated Testing, or MEIT. Haddad created on-orbit constraints tests that verified interfaces between flight systems, launched on different missions, then assembled in space.
More recently, he's been working on the Astro restoration project. The Astro series of Spacelab missions were launched in the 1990s on the Space Shuttle and utilized Spacelab mechanical and electronical subsystems to host telescopes, which made astronomical observations. The telescope uses the Spacelab instrument pointing system to provide stability and pointing accuracy to support their observations. The telescopes were mounted on a cruciform structure, which in turn attached to the instrument pointing system. After numerous delays, Astro 1 launched on December 2nd, 1990, aboard the Space Shuttle Columbia as part of STS-35. The complement of scientific experiments included 3 telescopes that conducted ultraviolet observations: the Hopkins Ultraviolet Telescope, the Wisconsin Ultraviolet Photopolarimeter Experiment, and the Ultraviolet Imaging Telescope. In addition, there was a 4th telescope, the Broadband X-ray Telescope, which performed X-ray astronomical observations. Astro 2 was launched on March 2nd, 1995, aboard the Space Shuttle Endeavour as part of STS-67. The 3 ultraviolet imaging telescopes from Astro 1 flew as the telescope complement on Astro 2.
So let's find out more and talk to Michael Haddad.
Taking you to Max Q and beyond, this is the Space and Things podcast.
All right. So welcome, Michael. Thank you for joining us this week. Now, we love a good scene-setting question on Space and Things. How did you become interested in the world of spaceflight? And was it like a specific launch or a program that excited you, or maybe even a particular place?
Well, actually, kind of both. I actually was born in Cleveland, Ohio, and we were living there when this whole space program was kind of going on. And I don't know what it was. I just kind of was fascinated with the space program. I mean, even when I was just a kid. And so I remember just sitting there watching it on TV in Ohio. I just thought it was neat that it was happening. And then eventually to kind of be part of that would just be so cool. And I was 7, 8 years old at the time. And then we actually moved down to Florida when I was 9.
Oh, wow.
In May of 1968. we were in Cleveland, Ohio. My dad says, we're moving to this city called Titusville, Florida. Well, what's a Titusville, Florida? So I look it up in the map, and it's right across the river from Kennedy Space Center. And I thought I'd died and gone to heaven. I said, oh my God, we're moving to a city where I can go down to the water and I could watch launches happen. So that was it. Basically, that I was done. I knew that's what I wanted to do. And kind of the rest is history after that. Moved on to May of 68, watched all the Apollo launches, and then went to school, and then, of course, went on to work at Kennedy Space Center. So that's kind of how I got in it. It was just when I was a kid, watching it on TV in Ohio, and once I moved to Florida, it's kind of a done deal after that.
There's quite a few those early astronauts were from Ohio as well, weren't they? John Glenn and Neil Armstrong, famously. Were they ever part of your life in any way before you moved to Florida?
No, never part of my life. Just kind of watched them on TV. I did get a chance, though, once after the Apollo 11 mission. Our elementary school was right on the main drag that goes through Titusville. It's called US 1. And they had a big parade. And I was able to go down and watch the parade go by when the Apollo 11 astronauts came by. So I actually got a chance to shake Neil Armstrong's hand when I was a kid. That's as much as I got to ever see them. Now, with John Glenn, when he flew on the shuttle, I got a chance to, my brother and I we were docents, or not docents, we were tour people at the time. And so we actually toured his entourage that was there for his mission when he landed. Not for the launch, but when he landed. It was interesting. He actually, we were working at a space station. He came through the building the one day, and I didn't get a chance to get too close to him, but, probably within 40 or 50 feet. And that guy was, 77 years old, right?
Yeah.
I think he still could have lifted me off the ground. I mean, at 77, that man was in incredible shape for a guy 77. I just want to be breathing at 77. He just looked so good at 77. Oh, this man's capable of going into space. And then, of course, once we did we were doing a tour for the landing, his people there, that I don't want to give all the names out, but basically the people we were touring and were part of watching the landing, they said one thing he wanted to do was to prove that he could walk off that shuttle after a shuttle mission. Because there's a lot of astronauts that can't. They have to be gurneyed off or whatever. It's violent. I mean, it's really tough on the human body. Mm. Well, when he came down them stairs, they basically they just stood up and cheered because he did what he wanted to do. He wanted to be able to walk off that shuttle at 77 years old. Amazing. But the really neat part was, following the mission, they had this big event down at the one of the hotels, in one of the big rooms that they have down at the hotel for the crew. And so we went in there, and it was like, we got a ticket and get in there. Well, the crew comes in, and John Glenn stops at the door, and the rest of the crew comes up to the stage. Well, he's standing near the door talking to a gentleman in a wheelchair, and figured out it was just a friend of his. And so, we were just sitting there waiting. And then, so the crew's talking and, trying to kill time until John Glenn went up on the stage. Finally, John Glenn comes up on the stage and goes, "Oh, I apologize for being a little late here, but I had to stop and talk to my good friend, Ted Williams, the baseball player." And he goes, "You guys know Ted Williams is the baseball player. Let me tell you about Ted Williams, the pilot, because evidently he was Glenn's wingman in the Marines when they were flying in the war." So he goes into this 10, 15-minute thing about him and Ted Williams as pilots. And it was just amazing. I mean, it's dead silent. It was just an amazing 10, 15 minutes. Of course, when he was done, everybody just standing there with their jaws open. Of course, we turned. By then, of course, they wheeled Ted Williams out of there because he would have been mobbed. But it was just the coolest thing to hear that story. Yeah. And for him to take the time to go and talk to Ted Williams when he walked in the room there. So it was just part of that whole John Glenn thing. I thought was, so I didn't get a chance to physically meet him, but I was involved in some things that he was doing for the shuttle program. Yeah.
That is freaking amazing. Oh my God. Sorry. My two worlds collided, sports and space flight. I love it. So you came to NASA right as the shuttle program really was beginning, before it was flying. What was your attitude towards the shuttle before it lifted off the pad in April 1981? And were you and your team devising payload integration even at that early stage?
Yeah, actually, I was still in college at the time for STS-1. We had what was called a co-op program at the time, where you can go to school for a semester and work for a semester, where an opening came at the Space Center for a co-op position in the Launch Control Center.
Wow.
It was a small room. It was on the first floor of the Launch Control Center. It's called the Complex Control Center. And it was basically the thing that handled all the remote activation of air conditioners and helium GN2 supplies, those kind of things. And so that's kind of where I co-opted that. So I was actually in there for STS-1. Was amazing. And we talked about the shuttle, how it looked kind of really weird. I mean, it didn't look like a normal rocket and that. So it was interesting to see, is this thing really going to work? Because it was never flown anything like that before. So it was interesting. It was fun. I mean, as a college student, being in the middle of all that was pretty good. And then, of course, when I went to graduate, at that time, the group when I was working there in the LCC, the group was mostly focused on the launch pad and the facility kind of stuff. So it really didn't have much to do with the payloads at the time when I was in school. When I went to graduate, cousin actually was working in this payloads group, this level 4 hands-on group there at Kennedy Space Center. And he says, "Hey, Mike, we really need new engineers here in this payloads group." And he was the one that actually got me an interview. What happened at the time? Well, it was interesting because at the time, they actually, when I went to graduate in May of April 82, they actually had a hiring freeze on. NASA wasn't hiring anybody. I thought, oh, great. I went through college and now I can't get into NASA because they got this hiring freeze. Well, as a co-op, you're already considered an employee.
Nice.
I did not fall in that category. So basically they could pull me in right away, which is just amazing. Again, I was like, well, just lucky, I guess, or whatever. I just happened to have somebody watching out for me. But when that happened, I went ahead and they had this thing set up where it was 90 days. You'd go into a group, you'd work there for 90 days, and then you go to the next group and work 90 days. And you would keep doing that until you found an organization you wanted to stay with. And that was kind of the rotation they had for new employees at the time. Well, I went into this payloads group. It's called Level 4 Integration. It was in the Spacelab program, which is it was a pressurized module and structures that flew in the back of the shuttle. It's basically payloads. So that was really my big first taste of payloads. Well, I was in there 30 days, and I said, I don't want to leave. And the boss says, we don't want you to leave. And that was it.
Nice.
That's where I stayed. I started in experiment integration, Spacelab Level 4 payloads as a engineer right out of college. What it was a really kind of unique group. In NASA, most of the space program is contractors. You have probably 1/10 of the people that actually work at NASA, and the rest are contractors that are, of course, hired on. And the way it normally works is you have a contractor engineer, contractor technician, safety, quality, all that. And then you have a NASA engineer kind of step back, kind of looking over their shoulder, participating, and active and responsible. But they're kind of one step back from the actual work on the flight hardware. Well, what they did with Level 4 experiment integration for Spacelab is we're going to try some new process. We're going to remove all of the contractors, except for the technicians, and have NASA do the work directly, which would, which was really unique. Now, they had that done for ground support equipment, but it was very rare for the flight hardware. And that's what we were doing. We were working on our flight. Our job was to take the experiments and that we're going to fly on the Spacelab missions and basically get them 100% operational before flight. So now we're doing the work that normally the contractor would do. And so I would review the drawings. I would write the procedures myself. And then with the technician, and we had NASA quality, NASA safety. The only contractor was our technicians, who were Boeing Zeiss at the time, who were the best contractors on the planet. I'm a little bit biased. That's okay. They were awesome technicians. And so basically all the other functions were done by NASA. And so it was great. I mean, it was neat because you could work right on the flight hardware. Another thing that happened, because there were so many operations going on, we had a limited number of technicians. They trained us engineers to do a technician function. So for some reason, there wasn't enough technicians to go around. I can go in and do the technician work myself. I could turn the bolts. I could push the buttons. I can pressurize the systems. I could do all that myself and just have the quality guy basically reading the steps in the procedure that I had written. So it was really, really neat. And when I found that out, that's why I didn't want to leave.
Yeah, of course.
And basically worked there for 7 years. And so that's basically when I first got involved in really payloads. And of course, at that point, the launch rate was ramping up. And so we were focusing on the payload we were working on, focusing on the ones that were coming down the pipe, the new ones, they were 1 or 2 years out. And then what also happened, it was kind of like an in and out kind of process to where we worked on it. And we followed it all the way through launch pad launch. We actually supported the mission because we'd spent much time with the hardware. We knew the hardware sometimes more than the designers because we'd spent so much time. Yeah. We solved the problems. We understood the things that were going bad. And so, and then we did what we had to do to fix them. Of course, when that happened during the mission, they'd come knock you on the shoulder. Hey, did you guys see this on the ground? Yeah, we saw it. This is the problem. This is how we fixed it. Boom, solution done.
Yes.
You don't have to try to, oh my gosh, what are we going to do? How we got to analyze, we got to look at data, we got to figure out what's going on. And we kind of knew the answer already. So it was real helpful for the mission. So they had us supporting the missions as well. But then the big thing too, of course, is when it came back, we had to take it all apart. And the hardware we were working with was reusable. And so the large pressurized pallet, the structures and all that were usable. So you would install all experiments, fly it. When you come back, we had to pull all those experiments off and then put new experiments on for the next flight that was assigned to. So we were working on stuff that was going to fly, planning for stuff that's going to fly, and then taking apart stuff that did fly. And so that was really, really the first taste of payloads. And then after that, I worked there about 7 years. And then I went on, and because of it was more focused on the Spacelab, the science experiments, I wanted to get more, I guess, exposure. I wanted to see and be involved with other type of payloads, like the planetaries, the missions to Jupiter, and then satellites, and these planet in like a place like things like Hubble telescope, those things. And so I would bounce to different organizations to be able to work on those payloads. And so that was kind of my first interaction with planning payloads and then, of course, working them. Yes, ma'am.
Excellent. So you've worked on many of the big payloads from the shuttle era, early shuttle era, such as you said Spacelab. You've worked on Galileo, Magellan, Astros 1 and 2, and the Hubble Space Telescope. So this might be a difficult question for you, but what was your favorite of the shuttle payloads? And also, what was the biggest challenge for you and your team to work on?
Oh, great question. I still think probably my most favorite one, it's hard because there was a lot of them that were favorite, was Hubble Telescope. I worked a deploy mission, basically the ground operations when Hubble got to Kennedy, and then all the closeouts of the pad. Well, part of the closeouts of the pad, and then, of course, watched it launch. So that was probably my favorite one, was working that because that was so unique and just so neat. The one I thought was the coolest payload was Galileo. Galileo was absolutely a gorgeous spacecraft. When they brought that thing in, it was black blanket material. It would use for thermal control, and then gold lettering. I mean, it was the most beautiful payload you ever want to see. So that was probably the most beautiful. The most challenging probably was Spacelab 1, which is STS-9. It was the first of the pressurized module Spacelab. It had over 70 experiments. It was over 14 different international countries. So it was really, to me, it was the first truly international effort. Yeah, Space Station was huge, and Space Station is huge and hugely successful in a lot of international aspects. But that, to me, that was really the first time that we'd done a little interaction with international partners. It was awesome. But it was a challenge because it was the first time that ever happened. And we'd never done anything like that before. We were all kids right out of college, in our early 20s, and we were now in charge of tens of multi-million dollars of a piece of flight hardware. And then bringing all, and kind of the way it worked was because of where we were at, all of the equipment would come there. So from all the different countries, different NASA centers, all that, universities, all that would come there for the first time and kind of see each other. And so our job was, of course, take those 70 plus experiments and get them the whole work together before it flew. And so that was a real challenge. And I had a mechanical part of that. Basically, our job was kind of put things together, assemble, pressurize, cooling, special gases, that kind of thing. And then the electrical branch was kind of involved. They did the electrical hands-on work as well, but then they were more involved with the actual testing aspect. And we supported them from a mechanical aspect. So that was real challenging, first getting it together and getting everything to work, because everything looks great on drawings until you try to put it together like a bicycle or something. So that was real challenging mechanically, is to get things together. And of course, testing was amazing because now you got 70 plus experiments that had never seen each other. They were great back in the lab wherever they came from, but now they got to work with all these other experiments. And then you got the timing aspect. You can't run all 70 at one time. And it was all planned out. And part of our job was to see if that would actually work.
Yeah.
I mean, okay, we want to run so many experiments, maybe all 70 will be running, but some will be maybe in the background, some will be more prime, how all that works. And so that was a real challenge. And kind of what we come up with, and kind of the idea was well, how do you verify that that's actually going to work? You test it all. But what we did was what's called the mission sequence test. And what we do is you have the timeline for the whole mission. This is the timeline from the time it gets in space until the time it comes home. What part of that mission or parts of that mission are the most challenging? What's going to push that hardware to the limit? What's going to make, if it's going to break, it's going to break during that time frame of the mission. That's what we'd run on the ground. We called it a mission sequence test. So we would, in essence, we're trying to see if it would break. And if it did break, then we would fix it and figure out how to not make it not break. It was a huge challenge. And of course, we were doing that, but then we're ramping up for other missions at the same time. So you couldn't spend 100% of your time on it. But Spacelab 1, I think, was the most challenging. But, and again, it's probably second is the most rewarding because of that fact that we spent so much time working on it.
Yeah.
And it flew and it was hugely successful. It was a huge success, and especially with all the international aspects of it. So yeah, it was awesome. So that's basically my 3. Yeah.
Excellent. So you've worked with heavy hitters such as Dr. Sally Ride. Do you have any stories you'd like to share about what it was like to work with her, and maybe even a few other icons of the shuttle program? You talked a little bit about John Glenn earlier.
Sally flew on STS-7, and we had a payload. It was actually our very first payload that flew, a level 4 payload that flew on that mission, STS-7. And of course, her being a crew member, we'd see her every once in a while. She would come down and she would participate in some of the testing. She was involved in another aspect of the mission, but so we would see her and briefly just say hello and that, and not get a chance to talk to her. When Challenger happened, of course, everything shut down. They had the Rogers Commission. Sally was a member of that Rogers Commission. And what came out of the Rogers Commission was, firstly, the why did it happen and make sure it doesn't happen again. And then also the impression was NASA was losing its leadership in space because of that. And so the administrator at the time, James Fletcher, he dubbed Sally to start this group called Task Group 1A to basically help determine how to get the leadership back and maintain it. Actually, early on, I'm going to go back a little bit. When I was in level 4, they had some people come from headquarters to ask us about how that process is going. Hey, how does this whole level 4 thing work with NASA doing the work? And my boss says, say anything you want.
Nice.
You could tell them anything you want about me. I don't care. Tell them you hate my guts. You think I'm the worst boss. I don't care. You say what you're going to say. Nobody's going to hold anything against you. But by the way, my boss was the best boss I ever had, Dean Hunter. He passed away, but he was my best boss. I want to just make that perfectly clear. He was he was my best boss. And so I did. I dumped my guts to these guys out of headquarters. I told them exactly what I thought. I said, this is a process I think is awesome. It's working awesome. I think it needs to be expanded to other areas of NASA and blah, blah, blah. And then off they went. So I figured it was just some group. Well, when they went to form this group for Sally Ride, evidently some of the people that I'd talked to at that time must have got Sally's ear or somebody dealing with Sally and said, hey, there's this guy at Kennedy. Because the idea we found out, and I tell you when I actually met Sally, was they picked me as a sole KSC person to work with Sally Ride on this team.
Wow.
And so my boss calls me in the office one day. This is in June of 86, shortly after the Challenger accident, and said, you got picked as a sole KSC person to be on this group led by Sally Ride. I go, what? And he goes, yeah, evidently what you told those guys at headquarters must have stuck. And they picked you to be the person on this team. And it's like, wow. I mean, this is really cool. He goes, oh, by the way, Sally's coming this afternoon. She wants to meet you because she wanted to meet everybody on our team. Yeah. And I go, what? I go, this is awesome. And so basically Sally walked in the room and she was just the best. I mean, she introduces to Sally Ride. It's like, hi, I'm Sally Ride. It's like, yeah, I don't know you and most of the people on the planet, but she still did that. She still took, she says, I'm Sally Ride, shook my hand. And she sat us down. She said, what the organization was she was building this group, one person from each of the NASA centers to form this group and then get together to figure out a strategic plan of leadership course for NASA in the future. And you got picked as the KSE guy. So it was wild. I mean, I could not believe it. And of course, after that, we would meet at different centers. The whole group would fly. Like we would fly to Marshall, we'd fly to Stennis or JPL or somewhere to meet. And so that happened over a course of about a year. And Sally would be there sometimes, you wouldn't be. But we got a chance to know Sally very well. She was a very, of course, a smart person, very humble. Like I say, wherever we went, she always introduced herself as Sally Ride, even I think everybody on the planet knew who she was. But she was tough. she would, if things weren't going the right way, she'd let you know, which was 100% okay. And I could just tell you this real quick. When the report was going to come out a year later, basically in 87, she went in front of, I guess it was one of the House subcommittees or something. And there was politicians there, you could tell didn't like the space program at all. And they start, throwing these questions out and trying to make a fool of Sally. And say, it ain't going to happen. No, it ain't going to happen. You're not going to, Sally's going to, she knows exactly how to handle those kind of people. And she did it very diplomatically. I mean, she was one of these people, it was so cool. She was one of these people that can tell you you're a loser and you would enjoy her telling you that. I mean, she just had that way of doing it, in a way of just telling you the facts and you kind of accepting it. Oh, well, that kind of makes sense. And that's kind of what she did here. She was very nice, very diplomatic, and kind of just told them, whatever they were asking at the time, that wasn't right, and this is really the way it's going and all that. So she was very articulate in everything she did. And of course, shortly after that, she left NASA and went in the private sector. But we had a chance to talk about things and the mission she worked and things like that. She'd actually worked, I guess it was another flight too, the OSTA 3 mission, which was another flight where she actually was working the arm. She worked the arm on both missions.
Yeah.
And some of the stuff that had happened there. So I got a chance to know Sally really well. I did see her again. We kind of stayed in touch with email and every once in a while. And then I physically saw her. She actually came down to Florida for a science seminar kind of thing. She actually something that she had created for women and young girls at the University of Central Florida in Orlando in 2003. And so I shot over there to see her because I wanted to see her. I hadn't seen her in so long. And so she was real busy. So just in a break, we got a chance to talk, and she just seemed awesome. She just seemed so happy to be doing this and how to bring young girls, young women into science and all that. And so that was really the last time I physically saw her. And then of course, she passed away a number of years later. Never got a chance to really talk to her again, but it was really sad, of course, when that happened. But yeah, she was an amazing person. Absolutely amazing. Yes, ma'am. And then let's see, somebody else. Some of the big ones, like, again, working Hubble, was John Grunsfeld.
Yes,
John Grunsfeld, who was a payload commander for a number of the repair missions. He's a good friend of ours. And I say ours because I actually met him through a friend of mine, Scott Vongan, who was a level 4 electrical. And the first mission John flew on, we got to know him through Scott. And so all those other missions, we just got to be real good friends with John. We'd gone skiing with him. In fact, that one ski trip, we're out in Colorado, and that's when him and his wife were still living in Houston. They flew to Colorado, went skiing with us, and then instead of me taking a flight back, at that time I was actually doing a detail in Houston. I flew on his plane with him and his wife. They flew me back to Houston, and so he was an avid pilot, and we're still in touch with him today. In fact, he's helping us with this Astro restoration project that we're working on now. And so he's another one of those heroes. Still a good friend, John Grunsfeld. People like Joseph Tanner, who done spacewalks. Mike Loss, and we call him L.A. I always butcher her name, so I'll just say Mike Ella. He was the one that was on Axiom, that flew as a payload commander from Axiom. He flew a number of shuttle missions. We're still good friends today. We talk. So those are probably the three main ones. Of course, Sam Durrance was another one. He was a payload specialist that flew on Astro. And again, payload specialists were more focused on payloads, where John, L.A., and Mike and Joe T were more of mission specialists that would flew multiple missions. But Sam was another one. Sam Durrance, who flew Astro twice and was good friends with him as well. Another super person. He passed away as well, unfortunately. But those are probably the four big ones of people that, to me, are just my heroes and just members of the space program that just done so much to push the space program forward. And so I'm just real, very, very fortunate just to have met them and be able to, talk with them and then eventually become good friends with them.
So moving on to later in your career, was there any particular event or incident that got you interested in preserving some of that shuttle hardware for display or as museum pieces? And what was being done with some of that shuttle hardware after the flights?
A lot of the hardware, well, we say a lot. There would be, if they were going to be reflights, of course, we would turn it around and fly it again. A lot of them were one-time shots. And a lot of times the experiments themselves, the pieces of experiment, would go back to the university professor, international partner, wherever that came from. So that's a physical experiment would go back and be part of, their research, and then eventually probably would put in a museum. Some of the support hardware that would support that mechanical and some of the electronics and all that maybe would be used for other flights. If it wasn't going to be used for other flights, a lot of times what they try to do is they would try to either get it to the designers, again, as a memento of the mission, send it to museums. That didn't always work out. And kind of what got us involved in this whole restoration project was when the Spacelab program was ending, which is around 1999, 2000, it was kind of just, we want to do stations, so kind of, get Spacelab out the door. And so at the time, things weren't going as far as what we thought was the best as far as doing stuff with this hardware. I'll just give you one example. Was there was a time when we started working space station, the operations and checkout building called Neil Armstrong Operations and Checkout Building. Now that's where we did all of our kind of level 4 Spacelab stuff. And then right next door across the street was a space station facility where we started doing the space station work. So I was bouncing back between the two buildings and got an umbrella. It's raining one day and I'm walking across the street and I see this flatbed truck going down the road with some of the tethered satellite support systems, some of the hardware that supported the tethered satellite mission. It's on a flatbed truck. There's not even a tarp on it. It's raining.
Oh my God.
And this is just going down the road, basically going to a place we called Ransom Road. What Ransom Road was at Kennedy was basically the boneyard, the graveyard where things would go. And it was basically would either be sold for scrapped or just, somebody would buy it and do whatever they wanted with it. Well, this hardware was heading there. So I got on the phone to some friends who had already started working some of this same process for the Astro hardware. After the Astro had flown, it was supposed to fly 6 times. There's supposed to be 6 Astro missions. 3 were planned after Challenger, and they only shot into actually 2 only flew. But then after that, some of this hardware was just being dispersed out into the world. And so we thought, this is not right. So this is probably in the 1990s, late 1990s. This isn't right. This stuff should not be going to be melted down as scrap by scrap dealers. And so my friend Scott Vongen kind of spearheaded the activity. Okay, we're going to try to save some of this stuff. And so kind of the way it worked, you go to Ransom Road and you had all this hardware on big pallets. You have to go in, you have to bid on the whole pallet. So, okay, there's one electronic box that's on this pallet that was Astro we wanted to save, but you got to buy the whole pallet. And so Scott would go, he started going and actually buying this stuff. He's, I'm going to just out of my own pocket, I'm going to buy this stuff to preserve it. Stuff we want, we'll take. Other stuff we know we'll send to a junk dealer or whatever, do something else with it. So he started that process of doing that. And so he was really the one that kicked this off to say, we need to preserve this hardware. And of course, with Scott, he ended up being actually selected as an alternate payload specialist. So Astro was near and dear to his heart. That's why he kind of chose Astro as kind of the stuff to save. And so that's what we did. Well, come to find out that these junk dealers, they were buying this stuff just for the sheer weight or the metal to be able to melt down or sell the metal based on weight. And so Scott can go in and buy this stuff that was millions of dollars when we were flying. He'd buy it for a couple $1,000s. So this is preserving hardware that flew. And okay, what do you do with it now?
Yeah.
You buy these pallets, where does it go? And so we had friends of ours that had aircraft hangars. We bought a number of renting out a bunch of storage units. Scott moved a bunch of this stuff to his house. His one bedroom, his garage was getting filled up with this stuff just because we wanted to save it. And it's interesting because as this went on, the junk dealers started to realize when they saw Scott, they thought, oh, this must be something valuable in this lot of stuff that they're selling. So they, of course, they had deep pockets, so they would just keep outbidding Scott. Well, we figured out real quick, that's not going to work, Scotty. You show up, we're not going to get this stuff. And so we started calling moles, where we'd have people that were part of our group that would go to the auction and buy this stuff. And of course, these junk dealers didn't know who this guy was. So he's just buying like everybody else, now realizing it was real valuable stuff to us. And so we had a number of moles that would go out there and bid on this stuff, so we didn't get outbid. So that whole team that did that, and we had a team that kind of would move it then from Ransom Road to wherever we were going to store it. So it went on for a while until basically we got as much hardware as we could. And it was just basically in storage. He said, what are we going to do with all this stuff? Well, we want to know. We just did not want it to get destroyed. We were hoping maybe one day we could put this in a museum or something and kind of show it off, electronic box or cable or fluid lines or blah, 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 whatever. hoping one day that it eventually would be put on display somewhere. Well, of course, time went on, and they had a reunion for, I think it was the 25th anniversary of the Astro mission. Scotty went to it. He was up in D.C. or at Goddard at the time. So he approached the curators at the Smithsonian Institute in Washington, the museum, and said, we've got this Astro hardware that's just kind of just sitting there. And, is there any way we can maybe put this on display in the Smithsonian? And I forgot the woman at the time what her name was. And she goes, that's an awesome idea. And so, boom, that was it. It's like, holy cow, we're going to work with the Smithsonian to be able to put this stuff that we've saved for 20 plus years in a museum, and not just a museum, but the Smithsonian in DC.
Amazing.
And so that kind of kicked off the restoration project. That was in 2017. I think is when we started that. Now, a couple other side stories with this was some of the hardware, of course, we lost. We couldn't get to it in time, or it was just gone. But there's 2 instances where something amazing happened. Scott went to one of the places, and it was one of the dealers in Huntsville, Alabama, that, or was it down here? I can't remember where it was. It was one of the places. Anyways, and he saw a box, huge box that had just the letters OSP on it. Well, that was one of the main, it's called optical sensor pockets. That was basically what it did for the Astro mission, because the Astro mission was a series of 3 telescopes that would point, ultraviolet telescopes that would point at things, and you get all ultraviolet information. Well, how would you kind of align that? It's almost like on a telescope where you've got the little lens, you get the coarse alignment with the lens on, and then you get the regular telescope that gets the actual. That's kind of what this did. It got aligned and kept these things aligned. We didn't know where that went. And Scott saw this box that had OSP on it. He goes, I know what OSP means. Of course, it's all sealed up. So he goes over, he tries to lift it, and it's real heavy. And he said, there's something inside here. And he says, it may be the flight OSP, the one that flew on the mission. Just happened to be sitting in the weeds over there. So he tells the guy, oh yeah, I hadn't got around to it. He goes, well, how much you want for it? Well, how much is it weigh? A couple 100 pounds. Give me $100 a pound or something, or $1 a pound. So like $600, $800 So we bring this back to his house. We pop open the top, and holy cow, there it is, flight OSP.
Wow.
One of the main 4 big instruments that flew, he happened to just see it sitting in the field, and now we've got it in our hands, the flight OSP. Unbelievable. And then one other story, one of the gentlemen in Huntsville that worked for Teledyne Brown, we worked with him during the Spacelab program. We still work with him today. In fact, he just retired from Teledyne Brown. Byron Bonds, he was in another field looking for artifacts and stuff. And he just noticed this huge red kind of structure. It was a piece of metal that had all these channels and stuff on it, just sitting in the weeds. And again, he goes, he knows what that is. And there was probably, no lie, there's probably a half a dozen people on the planet that would know what that bracket was. And so he goes over, he says, hey, what are you going to do with this bracket? Oh, I haven't gotten around to melt it down. He goes, well, can I have it? He goes, sure. It's, again, a couple $100, so in $1 a pound, give me a couple $100, you can take it. Well, what that was, it was the bracket, kind of the way the Astro was set up is you have the telescopes, you have this large center structure, what's called a cruciform. It's in the shape of a cross, a hard structure, and all these telescopes and hardware would mount to this cruciform. Well, between the instrument and the cruciform were these brackets with bolts, and that's how you would put this stuff together. Well, this red bracket was the bracket that went between the OSP and the cruciform. Wow. It was the main bracket. And if you look at this bracket, there would have been no way in heck you could have made this bracket. Like if we had the OSP, that's great. We got the cruciform, but the main bracket that connected the two, we did not have. And he found it laying in, and it happened to be in the grass there. And again, you would walk by, it's just a hunk of metal off of a board or something, but he knew what it was. Yeah. Like I say, a half a dozen people on the planet. He was just happened to be there and got that. So now we got the OSP, we got the bracket. And so kind of what we did is we talked with Smithsonian. They were going through a big renovation at the time. And so they said, well, we really can't have you guys, how do we put all this stuff together? What's the whole process? We thought, well, can we put it together in an offline area and then kind of wheel the whole thing to where people would see it? Or would it be really cool to where final location is just build up the whole thing there? So if people are walking by, you can see, you can talk to them and explain kind of what's going on. we figured probably the best thing would be build it up where it was at. Well, they were going through a big renovation. They couldn't do that. They said, we're moving things in and out. They said, why don't you get with the museum in Huntsville, Alabama? Because this Astro hardware was actually designed and built by Teledyne Brown and Marshall Space Flight Center in Huntsville, Alabama. That was where it came from. And so that's a great idea. And so we got with the museum people via the Smithsonian, working for the Smithsonian through the museum in Huntsville to start putting all this stuff together. And that's kind of what's happening now. We got, we have the cruciform. It was actually sitting in a machine shop. Byron's, I guess, cousin or had this machine shop, was sitting in the corner for 25 years. And it got all kind of stuff. And it has got dirt dauber nests and dead birds and rats. And anyways, and so we moved this thing into where we start doing the integration there in the museum there in Huntsville. It was an offline area. We started taking this apart, and you could just see it's one of those things where the cruciform was covered by these blanket material to keep it thermally consistent and safe. You know, it's anything else. You start pulling these blankets off, what they call open a can of worms, and it just was a disaster. And so we had to pull all this blanket material up, clean the structure, and then put it all back, the material back together. And then we, in time, we were able to get 2 of the 3 instruments. Well, let me say one of the 3 instruments right now. It's called the acronym. Again, we need to use acronyms because of the names are too long. Like this one we got was called the WUPPE. Which was a Wisconsin Ultraviolet Photoperimeter Experiment. Nice. WUPPE, called WUPPE. And so Scott says, hey, we got the cruciform. Let's contact the people where the instruments are at. These 3 instruments, we got the OSP, we got the cruciform, and put this main component of the thing back together and put it on display. Well, of course, the museum in Huntsville thought it was great. The person that came in as the director there was an old Spacelab person that we work with. And so we started putting this together in Huntsville, Alabama. Scott knew all the experimenters, so we talked to the University of Wisconsin. Scott and I actually flew up to Wisconsin to get the instrument, to prepare it. We sent it down to the museum there. We actually installed it on the cruciform. And now the other 2 instruments, which was Hopkins Ultraviolet Telescope and the Ultraviolet Imaging Telescope, both were currently at the Smithsonian in D.C. And the hut was actually on display there in D.C. And so they took that off and says, well, let's try and ship those 2 to Huntsville, and we'll have the OSP. So we'll have basically the component, we'll have the whole thing together.
Wow.
I mean, this is the flight hardware.
That's amazing.
This is a telescope package. This is really, and Scott puts it well, and it's the truth. It's the largest telescope package that's flown in space that's now on the planet, because you got like Hubble, James Webb, Gamma Ray Observatory, all those big observatories. They're not going to come back.
Yeah.
This came back. And so it's basically the largest telescope package that flew in space on the ground right now. And so we're basically in the process of trying to get those 2 instruments from the Smithsonian to Huntsville. Kind of what's happened at Smithsonian, and they say about maybe 2 to 4 years, they'll be done with the renovations. That then we would take this whole thing, would ship it up, and eventually get to that point where it eventually be on display in Washington, D.C. But as right now, you go to the U.S. Space and Rocket Center in Huntsville, Alabama. It's on display right now. You can see it. Walk right up to it. I mean, it's behind a barrier. And we're still working on stuff today on it. So it's so fun because, we travel up there. It's about 12-hour drive from here. We thought, you could fly up there, but it takes as much time to fly as drive. So we drive here. It's about a 12-hour drive up there and drive back. So we'll go up for a week or so and do some work, come back. We have a whole team in Huntsville. There's people that worked on it who still live in Huntsville that didn't help us. And so we got a team of about 20 of us or so that are still working on putting that together. So basically we have a dream come true. Back in the 90s, we're going to save this stuff. For some reason, we're not sure what it is. The whole museum thing came up. And so we're basically living the dream that we wanted to do, is being able to put something we flew on the Spacelab program, put it back together to show the world and have it on display for people to see.
Amazing.
Well, it's just, like I say, I'm so blessed just to be involved in any of this. And kind of my function is the lead. I'm the chief engineer for the project. So basically, but there's a lot of other engineering going on, but that's my title for this project, is I'm the chief engineer on, and that's going on today. And so, like I say,
Nice.
if you ever, anybody who listens to this or goes out, and here's this, it's on display right now in Huntsville at the atrium. You'll see it, walk right by it. It's on display. And hopefully maybe one of these days we'll be up there and we could talk to somebody that's maybe listening to this program. We talk to them about it.
Amazing.
Absolutely. Yeah. I need to go back to Huntsville. So final question. So what things do you think people can learn from your Astro restoration project, as we gear up for the next big space program, which is Artemis?
Just how to preserve stuff in the past. Take the time to say, yeah, this is worth it. Everybody thought we were nuts. We were crazy going to and buying this stuff. And what are you going to do with it? Well, we don't know yet, but we're going to save it. I think that's the big story is, if there's something you worked on in space, or I guess anything, but for us in the space program, that you have a chance of, okay, either it's going to be gone. I mean, if it goes to museums, that's awesome. Some other museum may buy it, that's great. But if it's going somewhere you really don't want it to go to, the idea is do whatever you can to just get it yourself.
Yeah.
And hold on to that, because you never know what's going to come up in the future. You never know what things will line up for you. And again, kind of maybe a weird analogy, lining up of the planets, that it actually worked. And that's why I would tell people, just to try to preserve whatever you can. It's not easy and it's not cheap, but it's worth it in the end. Yes, ma'am. Absolutely.
Absolutely. Well, thank you, Mike, for joining us today. I'm sure we're going to ask you back again to talk some other things. Emily's told me that you have the best stories. So, today I think we've heard some of them. So that's great. So, thanks for joining us, and best of luck with the rest of the Astro restoration. I need to head out to Huntsville again myself to check that out, but can't wait for it to get into the Smithsonian as well.
Well, thank you so much for getting me on your program. I really, really appreciate that. I'm honored to be able to do this, and
awesome.
You guys would ask me to do this, so thank you so much.
You're very welcome.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And we'll talk to you soon.
This podcast is fueled by our Patreon members. Why not help out by heading to patreon.com/spaceandthings.
That was an amazing interview. I love hearing his stories, and we've got to get him back again, because I'm sure there are plenty of other stories about other programs. There's a few things that I wanted to bring up. This Astro restoration project is amazing, but isn't it great that it was the people that worked on the hardware who are going out the way to collect it and find it? They're the perfect people to go and find those pieces in the scrapyards and know how they work, now how they fit together. Great that they decided to do it, but also that they're able to find as much as they have. What a great story.
It is an amazing story. I love the fact that, and Mike mentioned this during our interview, that it's going to be the first observatory that's not in space. You can view it on the ground. You can see what it looks like. I just think it's amazing. I love the fact that it was sort of a grassroots effort to preserve it. Yeah. Granted, they are working with Huntsville, the USSRC, and Huntsville and the Smithsonian, but it was very much a grassroots effort from the people who worked on the actual program, because they were seeing stuff, on flatbed trucks. Yeah. I talked to Mike a few months ago, and he told me that. I was like, what? They were just putting old stuff on trucks to go rot in the rain, just go rot in a scrapyard somewhere. And I'm like, I understand they have to recycle stuff. I understand when stuff's not being used anymore, you throw it out. I understand that, but this is something that went to space. I'm like, what? Can't they put it in a museum or something, or Udvar Hazy? Granted, there was no Udvar Hazy in the late 90s, but still, that's just, it's kind of sick. And I'm glad they're doing something like this to preserve this history and this heritage also, because I don't know if it's going to happen in the near future, but I'm sure someday there'll be a similar observatory in space. Maybe another spacecraft will carry it. Who knows, with people on it. I've always thought, I don't want to mention this program because I mention it every week on this damn show. There have been other spacecraft that have had observatories on it. And I'm like, I think there's a case for crewed observatories with people who are sort of operating them. And we need sort of to preserve that heritage if we can do that again.
How did you manage to get Skylab into this episode? How have you done that?
Yeah, exactly.
It's unbelievable.
It's a scandal, man. It is scandalous. Scandalous. Yeah.
No, but you made the point earlier that having one of the flown observatories on display is important, because we're not going to get Hubble back. Highly unlikely we're going to get Hubble back. We're not going to get JWST back. We're not going to get Chandra back. Yes, there are models and replications of those things that are in museums, some to scale, some full size, and they're very cool to see. But knowing that this one has actually gone to space and has come back, and even the story of it floating around and being in the corners of workshops and things like that, and then piecing it all together again is a cool story. And that alone makes any exhibit for that piece in a museum fun and interactive and tells a story.
Exactly.
Of course, you can't preserve every single item that's gone to space that's come back. Some things are just too big, and we can't do it. There's just not enough space, pardon the pun, to put everything in. And I mean, look at the problem with space junk in orbit. And even if you bring it all back down, there's still not enough places to put it down here.
There's nowhere to put it.
But to have a representative of the space telescopes that has flown in a museum is cool. And isn't it great that it's the people that put it there in the first place, that helped put it there in the first place, that are also helping to make sure it's preserved. I love that.
I love this, that it's also, like you said, it's like a grassroots thing. It's by the people who installed it. I think that's wonderful.
One other little point I'd like to make that I really enjoyed about the interview was how when he was talking about the astronauts he'd worked with, how he still called them his heroes, even though there were people that he worked alongside and with, and he was friends with them in some ways. Even when you're working in that level of the space program, the astronauts are still the heroes. And that must be a heavy burden on the astronauts, because they like to say, oh, it's a huge program, there's hundreds of thousands of people working on it, but those guys are the heroes. And I love hearing that from someone who's still there, that they don't look down on the astronauts for getting all the glory for the work that they're doing. I thought that was nice.
Yeah, I hope to have Mike back on the show eventually, because he's got stories that are just wild. I mean, that are amazing, and we need to preserve this part of history, definitely.
Amazing. Well, as always, you can watch the full unedited interview on our Patreon page. Head over to patreon.com/spaceandthings.com, and we'll put some information about Mike in the show notes, which you can find on spaceandthingspodcast.com, or by clicking in the link in the description of this podcast in your podcast provider.
So much universe in so little time. This is Space and Things.
So, as we said earlier, there is no What Caught Our Eye section this week, but that will be back next week. So thank you for all your support as always, and a big shout out once again to our Patreon subscribers. Of course, we'd love to have more of you join, so you can do that and find out more by heading to patreon.com/space and things.
Thank you for listening, and a big shout out to all of you who continue to share this podcast with their spaceflight loving friends and family. But please don't forget that in space, no one can hear you meet.
Thanks for listening to the Space and Things podcast.